Hello. We are pleased today to have on our podcast Rob Biederman of Asymmetric Capital Partners, where he's a founder and managing partner. Prior to founding Asymmetric, Rob was a co-founder and co-CEO for 8 years at Catalant Technologies. And prior to that, Rob was a private equity investor at Goldman Sachs and Bain Capital. Rob graduated from some good schools. I guess we share the alma mater and the business school. So Princeton University with an AB in economics and finance and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Good choices, Rob. So thank you for joining us. And I'll kick started with asking you maybe to tell us a little bit about your career, how you ended up where you ended up. And I think that will dovetail into the story of your fund.
I think there's sort of a trend among VCs to believe that you have this unusual, one-of-a-kind path to the industry. And I think the reality is every VC has that. There's no classic 2 years of investment banking and then right to private equity. My career, I think, it seems when you look at it in retrospect, it seems very linear and very obvious that you would go to Goldman Sachs, then go to Bain Capital, go to business school, start a company, and run a VC firm. And it almost feels as if I drew it all out that way. But in reality, I was always just doing the next thing that felt most obvious. So I went to Goldman because they tended to recruit really well on campus. And once you were there, they made it a really good experience for you. And I spent 2 summers there when I was an undergrad. Bain Capital recruited very well out of Goldman. And I think in each phase, one thing that's kind of tied each step of my career together is there's always been pretty heavy involvement as you go from one phase to the next. So it was my group at Goldman that really helped me get into Bain Capital. The Bain Capital folks were instrumental in getting Catalant set up. And then it's essentially the board of directors of Catalant and the investors at Catalant that put Asymmetric together with me. And I like that continuity from each relationship. And I hope that those 4 experiences form the sum total of my, at least for-profit career. There's definitely been a few common threads across all 4. I think the pursuit of intellectual truth has been true in each case. I think being integrity-filled and working hard has been true, and also putting work in its proper place and trying to make it as fun as possible, even though, there's nothing inherently necessarily joyful about doing LP investing or GP investing. It's all things that I've come to find are really fun.
And you started Catalant after business school, right? So having done investing before, what kind of prompted you to become an entrepreneur?
Well, I really actually started Catalant as hourly nerd during my first year in business school. And the specifics were that I was actually sponsored by Bain Capital and was supposed to go back after HBS. And I signed some paperwork to reflect that, and Bain very generously was paying for business school. I'm not sure I ever would have become an entrepreneur. So the company came out of a class project that every first year was forced to complete. I think I'd wanted to start a business when I was younger, and I started some small lifestyle businesses when I was an undergrad. The reality of entrepreneurship is that it can be incredibly intimidating. And I think if you're not a technical person and you're not a designer and you never sold anything, the perceived barrier to entrepreneurship is very high. And so the path through which I got into it, which was having a business school class project that turned out to be very successful, was in some sense the only path I could have taken to entrepreneurship, because every other path I felt was closed off to me. And the reality is Goldman does an unbelievable job of recruiting people coming out of undergrad. And so if you summarize kind of all the forces for impressive people's time and attention, and I think one's perception that entrepreneurship is something that's very difficult and not available to most people, a lot of people, smart people who probably should start companies don't end up actually doing so.
And given your background, especially as a former founder, what were the most important values to you as you decided to start your own venture capital fund and become an investor?
VC, who I have a lot of respect for, Miles Grimshaw, has an analogy of venture capital that a good VC meeting or a good founder pitch is like planning for an adventure, and a bad one is like preparing for a colonoscopy. Core to our firm is a lot of empathy for the founder experience, and that's obviously in some sense a throwaway line, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a VC that doesn't agree with that. I think it's very personal for me, having started a company and taken it through what are now 7 rounds of fundraising and still being involved as the chairman of the company. There can sometimes be from VCs hey, I have 25 or 30 portfolio companies. On average, they're not going to work out. I'm not going to support them through to the end if they're not going to be a big return driver for my fund. And at Asymmetric, we've taken the exact opposite approach. We've said that we believe we can make every company is successful on some level. And there will be times that we lose our money, of course. And there are times that the company is never going to reach product market fit, and we and our investors are going to experience total loss. We want that to be the very small minority of the time. And so we are, in some sense, rejecting the power law belief about venture capital and saying we are going to try to support most of our companies to some sort of successful exit for the founder and hopefully for us. And we're obviously going to have a handful that are more successful than the others, and that will be fantastic for those founders and for us. But I think the sort of general Tao of venture capital that you should shirk your bottom 20 or 30% is probably not correct vis-a-vis doing right by the founder, and also probably, if you did the math, not the best thing. But it's deeply unpleasant work. So it's a lot easier to show up at a board meeting every 93 days for a company that's found product market fit, get them more capital, help them raise capital from others, help them manage hiring, than do kind of the painful work of actually helping companies reach product market fit. And that explains why most people don't do that. They sort of disappear when the company isn't going well.
And I know this will be might be a hard question, but if you had to say just one thing, what was the most important lesson that you learned as a founder?
No development is as good or as bad as it seems. I think there were so many times, we got Mark Cuban to invest, we got Greylock and Highland to invest, our largest customer churned. All those decisions the day they happened felt as if they were this huge net present value swing. And the practical reality is that a wonderful company in most cases takes 6 to 10 years of consistent effort, 250 days a year. And I, as a young founder, when we started the company, I was 26 years old. I over-indexed to a lot of those developments. And so Hourly Nerd, at least for the first probably 4 to 6 years, had a lot of emotional swings of this great thing happened, oh my God, we're going to succeed. This bad thing happened, oh my God, we're going to fail. And the reality is, in most cases, those developments are not that big. And I think I've tried to carry that over to our founders. We often fancy ourselves as the firm on your cap table you want to call when things go badly. So your CTO quits, one of your design partners doesn't convert, you find out that dogs aren't eating the dog food. That's the day we want the call, because we can, first of all, calm you down and tell you it doesn't matter that much, and then actually roll up our sleeves, maybe even fly to where you are and start firefighting alongside you.
Tell us what Catalant does, and also, I mean, it sounds like you've been an entrepreneur twice, right? You started a company and then you started a fund, and we kind of share that experience because we have started, a new strategy. So it's kind of like it's like starting a company again. So what were the common experiences or the unexpected challenges?
For sure. So first, what Catalant does, we connect folks at principally Fortune 25 and Fortune 30 companies with incredibly talented folks on an on-demand basis. So if you imagine your former McKinsey partner, your former systems engineer at Raytheon, in a flexible model that looks a little bit of GLG, a little bit of McKinsey, and a little bit of a staffing firm, but all with technology. So all of the matches are made with large language models. And I think we've, relative to the fact that we're still a small company with, around about 100 million of annual services value, are actually moving the needle for our customers. And so we sit in a probably more privileged position than your average staffing firm that is very much a price taker for roles that are coming off a conveyor belt. We're actually really driving the story of how companies are accessing talent. And increasingly, we're saying that it's a really viable alternative to a Bain or a McKinsey, which is something that would have been unthinkable 11 years ago when we started the company. Of course, there are incumbents in the consulting industry and in the flexible staffing industry, particularly the recruiting firms, that we do the same thing as. I think because of the tech advantage, we can do it with far better unit economics with a more interesting population of people, where we have 110,000 folks on the platform, which is more than Bain, BCG, and McKinsey combined, and that's pretty dynamic for the customer. So the similarity between both took a relatively non-consensus approach to creating value for the parts of the ecosystem that we felt deserved value. And that, in the case of Catalant, was largely the expert, who in the consulting use case is generally not thought of particularly highly in the overall value equation, and the customer. And at Asymmetric, we've oriented the entire operating system around two groups, which are the founder and the limited partner. And the key party harmed by that is the management company and the GP, which is me and my colleagues. And we've said, there are only two goals of Asymmetric. One is making world-class LP returns, and we think one of the consequences of doing that is that our founders are going to be very economically successful. Way downstream of that, we will be economically successful. But if you look at the core of asset management today, and by the way, none of these people are bad people, they just have a different set of values and principles than I do. You can make a lot of money as the general partner while making no money for the LPs and virtually no money for the founders. And that's a odd peculiarity of this asset class, that the best results, the people who are doing best in the game, are actually not the people who make the most money, which is so different from something like hedge funds, for example.
That makes sense. And where are you guys based?
We have three positions, let me respond to that. It's a tricky one because there's a tax implication, so I will.
Yeah.
So we have three cities we operate out of, New York, Boston, and San Francisco, where we have folks on the ground. Virtually the entire investment team spends most of their time in New York. I split time New York, Boston. Our COO is in Boston, and our head of portfolio and post-close activities is out in San Francisco.
Cool. Because I was going to say, because I watched the video on the website and it looked like a ski lodge, that if that was the office, I was going to ask for a friend if we could potentially crash there at some point or another. It looked amazing. So.
Oh my God, we'd love that.
Fireplace. You guys have a dog.
We do have a team dog. So, we do an offsite in Jackson Hole every year. Traditionally the first week of the year. We bring all the founders that we backed in the prior 12 months, and any founder that we backed previously that referred us a deal in the years that followed, a deal that we did. And that it's only 1 week, but it's such an incredible time to get team together. Some of our limited partners and advisors come out. And of course, it's a wonderful place, and that makes it a great experience. But being able to have that time offsite, outside of a conference room with our founders is really special, and it really percolates through the remaining 51 weeks of the year.
Right, absolutely. And there's a team dog, which I have advocated for very strongly to my partners, and I hope this helps. So
a team dog is essential. And actually every member of the team at Asymmetric has a dog. 2 of the 4 in the New York office actually come in relatively frequently, and luckily they get along pretty well.
Oh, that's awesome.
And tell us a little more about kind of the metrics, the parameters of your firm. What is the check size? What is the stage? What type of founders do you look for? What type of sectors, markets, et cetera?
Yeah, so we invest virtually exclusively at the pre-revenue stage. We do that in pre-seed and seed. We really prefer vertical market software and healthcare IT. We do most of our investing in New York and Boston, with some amount in California. I think we're generally looking for folks that have some demonstrated track record of success, and it doesn't necessarily mean they have to have been a founder, but people who have been successful at larger companies taking new products to market. Maybe they've pioneered a go-to-market motion that was not part of the existing value prop when they got there. And we probably partner with people slightly later in their personal career journey than many other firms. So I think we've only backed one person who was only a few years out of school. Most of the time we like them to have about a decade of work experience, because we think your skill for combating strange situations just continues to improve as you get deeper in your career. And we typically also like to have seen 1, 2, 3 different roles. And so they have different contexts to apply learnings to, because obviously, as I saw as a founder, you face 20 decisions a day.
So you come in super early at the seed level. Check size and kind of investment over time looks like what?
We like to do somewhere between 500,000 and 5 million out of the gate, and we can scale. With our fund 2, we can probably scale into $7 to $8 million positions. I think our average in fund 1 is 2.5, and our average in fund 2 will be roughly on the $4 million side.
That's a pretty wide range for a pre-seed. Like, how do you scale that? Is it depending on the situation, I guess, where you have like more confidence, or how do you judge that?
Yeah, we try to tailor the amount of funding to where the company is in its life cycle, and also the dilution that founders are willing to take at a certain stage. So there are investments, I would actually say it's almost the exact opposite of confidence that scales with our check size. It's more, if we've decided binarily that we want to be in business with somebody, we also want to own as much of their company as possible. Most of the people we back are pretty thoughtful, and they want to get to profitability using as little capital as possible. And so a lot of our $500,000 investments, we had the same amount of conviction as a $4 million investment. We just had a founder that only wanted to dilute themselves a certain amount. We are trying to, in general, make a first investment and then quickly follow it with a second if we didn't get to scale at the first one. But we also, I think, are not, there's some firms that are absolutely religious about dollars at stake or dollars at work or ownership percentage. And I think we tend to be a little more philosophical about that. And I think the biggest risk is not being able to get into a deal that's good rather than having to deviate from your parameters.
Are there any particular themes that you find to be, of interest right now, and or, a company that you recently invested in that you'd like to highlight?
Sure. So first, the theme, which I think is reasonably universal, but probably most firms aren't quite so focused on it as we are, which is that large language models are changing all kinds of vertical market software for the better. And I think the insight that we had is it is difficult today for AI or an LLM to be a decision maker in a process, particularly a process that's high stakes and high dollars. So right. AI can help you decide what content you should see in a pre-roll ad, and the outcome of that being wrong is not very bad. But for life and death type decisions, AI can be a great vetter and filter and triage provider. And some of our most successful investments are in companies where there are very large data sets that have big economic consequences, and a large language model can help a human decide how to spend their time against that data set. A company that we invested in recently that I'm tremendously excited about is a company called Splash, and it is a consolidation program in the pool cleaning business. And that is not the most obvious way to hear me go from large language models applied to, enterprise-sized data sets. But I think it also reflects that we are reasonably mentally pliable, and we believe strongly there should be a national brand in pool cleaning as there is in pest removal and tree removal and all of the above. And we located a particularly special entrepreneur that had an insight on the space, had built a similar related company before. And I think most importantly, as a prerequisite for any investment we do in a sort of revenue producing existing company, had a very clean hypothesis for why technology was going to really change the pool cleaning business. And to the point of, I heard a good framework for venture capital investing, which is find a race worth winning and a horse worth betting on. This feels like a race that is worth winning for sure. And if you talk to anybody with a pool, they have been very enthusiastic about what we're doing. And then also a race where we found an amazing horse, and we think there's going to be a handful of horses in the race where if you try to back the next LLM, you're going to be in a 100 or 150 horse race, and that feels less attractive to us.
I know that you back a lot of B2B software plays and marketplaces, and a lot of those bets tend to be vertical, right? Especially the last few years, with the big guys kind of taking the lion's share of any horizontal businesses. How do you think about that dichotomy given kind of the arrival of AI? Do you feel that AI is going to play out as a vertical solution that is tailored to a specific problem? And then the big guys will kind of win the horizontal space. Like, how do you think about that?
I hate to add nothing in response to what you said, but I do agree with that. I think the story of AI and horizontal is going to be that a lot of benefits accrue to the existing scaled players. So I had a watershed moment with one of our founders who we just backed. He had been, his company had been acquired by Salesforce. He'd been there a long time, 3 years as a manager. He gets back to coding when we backed him. And I said, how's it being hands-on keyboard again? And he said, oh my God, the difference in coding with GitHub and OpenAI is massive. And then I did some thinking and realized that GitHub and OpenAI, whether literally or implicitly, have the same corporate parent, which is Microsoft. That was a watershed moment for me where I realized that most broad applications that could serve kind of any company, e.g. horizontal, there's so many just absolute 50,000 pound gorillas in that space, whether it's Salesforce and Microsoft and Google and Amazon, that it's risky whether it's back end or front end or application or otherwise to believe that you're going to back some minnow of a company that's ultimately going to be able to overcome the distribution and funding advantages of those companies. And by the way, some people will do it and those companies will buy them. Whereas in vertical, it is really difficult to run a consolidation aggregation play in vertical software. And each individual space, whether it's how local pools refill their chemicals or how trucks and routes get optimized, there are potentially 10, 20, 50,000 scaled vertical software companies that should exist for every narrow little part there. And it's very much not a zero-sum winner-take-all game where any one business can have 10, 15, 20 software vendors if each of those continues creating incremental ROI. As in my originalist construction, everything that's currently done with pen and paper, text messages, phone calls, and emails will be done by some combination of software and marketplace. And versus when we were doing this 3 years ago, large language models can make those products really valuable really quickly. So there isn't the same, hey, you have to believe and bet on this company for 1, 2, 3 years before you start seeing value. One of our companies, Evolution IQ, the user sees benefits that sometimes are in excess of the cost of the product within a couple of weeks or a month. And that makes it a very dynamic selling environment for those companies, and that makes us more excited about backing those companies.
Given that you've thought a lot about kind of venture in starting your own fund, how do you think AI affects our business, right? I mean, it's at some high level, it's basically an information and knowledge business, but it's also a lot of other ingredients, psychology, judgment, etc. So how does AI have a role to play? How does that work?
I think probably less than most people assume. The reality of our business, particularly at the pre-revenue stage, and I don't think this applies to pre-IPO or late-stage crossover growth investing, where I think AI actually might be really impactful for helping you, again, filter and vet the companies you should spend time with. The reality of our business is if you tried to create an AI model and apply it to a founder interaction, so you might say one potential good use of AI is you have our team talk to a founder for 60 minutes, and then the AI looks at how much those conversations are relative to the other 10,000 60-minute phone calls and says this person has a lot of traits that correlate. And I unfortunately just don't think our business can be made scientific in that way. I think our business is very much, certainly the pre-revenue, pre-seed business is by definition an artisanal, handcrafted game. And you see repeatedly folks try to turn it into something else, and they've never succeeded. There are people who have tried to index the market and back a lot of companies, and it is very, very rare that those are successful. When you think about the shame of this business for most capitalists, it's that it really doesn't scale. 100, 200, maybe $300 million max is the right size for an early stage venture fund. But the economics of that are much less interesting than being a 1, 2, 10, $20 billion private capital fund. And so as a result, unsurprisingly, most of the smartest people go run $1 to $10 billion funds because it's a much easier life, and they get to spend time on a reproducible, high likelihood activity, which is fundraising, instead of a very hard to replicate, low likelihood activity, which is finding winning companies and backing them. I would say the best early stage funds, you partner with them. Their secret is not in discovering the best people, it's getting the best people to work with them. And I'm sure you guys and most VCs would agree with that. And so, if you think the competitive advantage is selling the founder and working with you, AI has virtually nothing to do with that.
I was going to ask the same question, but I'll ask a bit of a different question, I guess. Given that so many funds are now targeting, only investing in AI, how do you think that's going to shape the overall VC industry?
This is a little pessimistic, but I think it's pretty likely that will lead to returns going down. And I can give you guys my full kind of talk track on what I think is going to happen with AI investing. So large language models and artificial intelligence, absolutely an important scientific discovery. Not new, not something that started 12 months ago, but is many decades old. It's gotten a lot better lately with some new advances. The challenge is most people, like a youth soccer game, are running to the most crowded competitive spaces and stupid framework for investing. But, on average, the total amount of dollars invested divided into the total amount of dollars that come out is industry level returns. There are some people like Benchmark and Sequoia that I think have access to unfair deal opportunities and should get a little more of the pie than other people. But generally, it's not so fun to participate in a game that on average is not a good game, because then certainly only people who are better than average get good returns. And even if you are, let's say you're a VC firm who gets really disproportionate access to the best companies, money flowing into the space, into the bad companies, is bad for you. And it's bad for you for 3 reasons. One, it raises the price of everything: employees, customer eyeballs. 2, it Some fraction of customers will decide to go with the suboptimal technology, which you see in every single space, and you will have to spend time and money converting them away from the bad folks that they've decided to work with. And then lastly, it just creates commercial confusion and clutter in the space. And so even if the long-term industry structure is you're going to have kind of vanilla and chocolate ice cream, if out of the gate the space has 250 flavors of ice cream, the ultimate returns that the people who back vanilla and chocolate experience are just not that special. And so I actually think the first wave of AI is really disappointing media articles is, within months away. The other thing that I think is going to be really tough for the AI space is it's so expensive right now to add compute into your processes. And the candid reality is that most current processes economics are not muchly changed by that compute. And so AI on the whole does not have a good customer ROI. It is extremely rare that not a good customer ROI translates to really good returns. And yet there will be a lot of people that make money in AI. That's the rub. So for people who are choosing to participate in it, I suspect virtually all of them think that they are more special than average in a very Garrison Keillor, like woebegone type way. And so it's rational for each individual participant to play the game, but then you end up with everybody playing the game, and that makes it much more difficult.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's kind of similar to what you've seen in all the other boom cycles, right? People get excited, things are overblown. You have a first wave where it's disappointing, but then the second wave kind of clarifies things and maybe evolves. The pace, the thing that may be very different is the pace at which things are happening is much faster, right? Because you see the technology evolve and companies shooting up and down. And so it's definitely going to affect a lot of things, but yeah, the general patterns kind of make sense.
Yeah, it's also hard. I get sent a lot of annual meeting decks and investor letters, and it is very much of the moment to tell your LPs that you're all in on AI. And when you tell your LPs that you're skeptical of AI and you don't think that it's going to have attractive returns, that's a pretty contrarian, non-consensus thing to say today. And unfortunately, venture is an asset class. We have this woodcut at our office that says conventional methods, conventional outcomes. Venture is absolutely an asset class where you can get lucky often enough with bad conventional methods to stay in business. And if you decide to go maverick and reject the orthodoxy of much of the industry, there's a decent chance that you pull off a big short type thing. And there's also a decent chance that you get totally smoked because you were wrong about it. And so it's an asset class where being contrarian is something that everybody would like to be. But then when that actually, if you think of being contrarian, simply one vector is deployment pace. Doing no deals when everybody else is doing deals or doing lots of deals when nobody's doing deals is a pretty scary thing to tell your LPs about.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
Switching gears for a second, tell us a little bit about yourself. Kind of where did you grow up? Like, did you always have kind of a vision of being in business? Like how did you kind of navigate to where you are today?
Yeah, I was born in Manhattan and grew up in a town called Chappaqua, about 45 minutes north of the city. My dad brings this up all the time, but I think when I was in second grade, my parents got me two books. They were the Totally Awesome Money book for kids and the Totally Awesome Business book for kids. And I think the tagline on the latter was, with 10 awesome businesses, you can start right now. And when I read those two books, I just became obsessed with, lame as this is for an 8 or 9-year-old, kind of commerce and everything associated with it. And started a lot of businesses in the neighborhood growing up and at camp. When I got to my freshman year of college, Lacoste polos were incredibly popular, but also incredibly expensive. So I found a supplier who would ship me them directly from overseas. It's unclear exactly the provenance of these Lacoste polos. Like they were not exactly, coming out of the front door of the factory, but I sold them all over the campus. And that gave me a real taste for kind of what a P&L looked like, because I think at the time I maybe had $500 in my bank account, and I sent about 500 of them out to, I think it was India, for this box of polos. And ultimately, there was a sweaty period there for 3 weeks where I wasn't sure if they were going to show up, and I all of a sudden had no money. And that concept of having skin in the game and risk really got me excited. And I knew I wanted to do something in business. It was not at all obvious that I was going to go straight from college and be a private equity investor. I think that was certainly a minority likelihood outcome, but I got really lucky ending up in a Goldman super day for the private equity group. And when I first got exposed to private equity, I found it to be such a fun intersection of company operations and managing risk and return and thinking about how markets are going to evolve, that obviously what we do now is way very early, but still technically literally private equity. And so I've now, in my first 4 jobs, basically been an LP, a GP twice, and a founder who's raised money from GPs. And I think it's likely I'll spend the rest of my for-profit career in the private markets, almost certainly probably just running Asymmetric, but wouldn't, we do start a company from time to time within Asymmetric as a hatch, and I'd love to start another one at some point.
Yeah, what's amazing is that I think kids nowadays have a lot more context for all these items, right? Like I remember I was at Princeton last year kind of giving a presentation. The questions that I got from the audience were amazing. And, compared to when I was there, 30 years ago, I didn't even know what venture capital was. I didn't find that out until I went to business school. And so I think that's evolved. Do you agree with that? And is that a good thing for the country or the economy?
For sure. Look, there's always a place for companies that need funding. If you think about why venture capital exists in its most raw form, it's because there are good, viable business ideas that have net present value greater than 0. They're going to lose money for their first, second, third, 10th year of operation. And so the fact that there's risk capital out there to fund ideas that are not profitable on day one is important, because, stupid framework, a lot of businesses that can be profitable on day one are actually not very high potential businesses. And so if you think about the average service business, it doesn't necessarily advance humanity very much, but it could be profitable on day one, whereas a lot of things require a lot of upfront investment that might lose money for a decade or 2 decades. So the fact that there's risk capital available in the market is great. What I'd love to see the venture capital industry change is that so much of venture, if you think of broadly high growth risk private capital, on a dollars basis, so much of it is piling into successful companies. And so little of it is turning on new companies. So I'd love to see if the ratio right now is 90, $10 or 95, $5 pre-post product market fit. It would be beneficial, I think, for humankind and for the United States if way more money went to pre-product market fit companies. And there was just more. If you think about our advancing as a society, there's obviously university research, which helps. But in terms of private for-profit innovation, the number of shots we get on the dartboard linearly ties to the amount of pre-product market fit venture dollars that exist. And the reality is there are not very many today.
I want to circle back to something that you said earlier, because I think it's a very, very important topic that doesn't get enough attention. But you had mentioned, one of the more difficult things as a founder is the emotional highs and lows. What advice do you have for founders on how to manage that and manage their mental health?
So I think it's difficult to be a founder without a co-founder. We love 2 co-founders at Asymmetric. We don't particularly love solo founders. We don't particularly love 3 or more co-founders, which doesn't mean we don't do it, but 2 feels like the right amount. If you don't have a co-founder, you really need a group of people that are at the similar phase. The challenge is if you're, pre-seed backed and you're in a self-help support group with somebody who's raised $250 million, your challenges in your life are totally different from theirs. So you need to find people that are at your stage. And I think you really need to bring non-professional relationships, whether they're romantic or sibling or friend or parent or child, into your trust tree for how you're truly feeling about the experience. There's so much of this industry where you have to tell everybody that you're crushing it and killing it and the customer's buying. And having run a company for 11 years now, I can assure you that 99% of things that you find out about your company are not positive. And this is a company that's been wildly successful. And only 1% of things that happen or 1% of piece of information are super positive. And that is a acceptable part of the entrepreneurship journey. I wrote a tweet a few years ago that's gotten a lot of nice uptake. That's basically the fact that other people gave up at this point is why you have an opportunity. And so any commercial endeavor that's starting from 0 is going to have far more failure than success. But that's difficult if you come from an industry like investment banking or private equity or consulting, where most of your life is do something good, receive pat on head. There's nobody giving out head pats in the entrepreneurship space. And that was probably the most difficult adjustment for me as a founder, was leaving the office every day feeling like I'd accomplished nothing and received no positive feedback from anybody.
So shifting gears here to our 4 standard questions. We're looking forward to hearing your answers, Rob. Our first is the NVCA question. So the National Venture Capital Association advocates for public policy that supports the venture community and the American entrepreneurial ecosystem. If there's one thing that you would change about the VC industry or one policy that you'd advocate for, what would it be?
One policy they have in the UK, which I think is really cool and would love to see in the US, is that if you invest in a startup that qualifies and is not part of a $50 million party round, you actually get a tax credit for the money that you lose. And of course, this would have to be massively patrolled to avoid anything illegitimate. But I think giving the average American more financial incentive to invest behind risky enterprises would stimulate new business creation, which has fallen very materially over the last decade, and I think is at serious risk.
Yeah, that would be a good one. Number 2, if you were not a VC investor and money was not a concern, what career would you have?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many different answers to this. I'd love to open a restaurant, I don't know if I'd want to be a chef, but a restaurateur, and at least the sort of visionary menu producer.
What kind of restaurant would it be? Like what cuisine?
So it would be kind of American classics. There's a restaurant in Boston that's otherwise unspectacular, but I remember dining there once and I saw that every single item on the menu was what I would have at my restaurants. There'd be lobster rolls and there'd be gnocchi, and it would just be sort of everything that I liked and have absolutely no coherence whatsoever. The other thing I'd love to do is be a backcountry ski guide or a fly fishing guide. I think both of those would be really cool to be able to share off the beaten path natural places with people. My specific challenge in doing either of those is I'm not especially good at either one. So this is a fantasy world where one, I have enough money to do whatever I want, and two, all of a sudden I've become an excellent skier. And then if it was something that had a little less excitement to it, would love to be a golf caddy just because I love helping other people and love being outdoors. And that would be a really fun way to spend time.
The skier is a very common one that we get. And I would say, arguably, I think all those people also admit that they have no talent in doing so.
Yeah.
But
managing risk and reward.
with you. Exactly. Number 3 is, who is someone that you look up to and why?
You know, each member of my family has inspired me in tremendous ways over the course of my time. I think all 3 of my family members are entrepreneurs, people who've started their own businesses, started in bigger companies, and then decided they wanted to go in their own direction. Probably my actual answer to the question, though, having been a New England Patriots fan for quite some time, I think Bill Belichick was a special kind of leader because he led through working harder than everybody else and being significantly more thoughtful, being willing to do things that maybe struck people as crazy for a long time. And I think a lot of the time were ultimately proved to be correct. If you think a lot of the Patriots' most important free agent acquisitions were pretty controversial at the time, but worked out. And I think he paid attention to details in a way that most other people don't. There's a great book, my favorite book, The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh, which is many of the same things, which is that if you perform properly and do all of the right things, that you usually will end up winning the game, and it takes a lot of your concern away.
Number 4 is, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
My dad once told me the customer doesn't care about your excuses. He runs a park in Midtown Manhattan, and a lot of things go well at the park, and occasionally 1 or 2 things doesn't go well. And I think about that a lot in the context of our portfolio company. You know, sometimes you go to one of your portfolio company's websites and it's down, and you ping the founder, you know, hey, your site's down. They said, oh, it's because of this. And I typically respond, well, I don't know if the person who wanted to use our website that day really cares why it's down. And I think about that a lot when you have a less than ideal service experience that's explained to you by the company providing the service. They always have a good explanation, but the real explanation is you should try to provide good service whenever you can. And you hope that your customer is empathetic and gives you another chance. But the reality is there's really no substitute in business for just performing well.
Good piece of advice.
Well, Rob, thank you very much for your time today. Really enjoyed learning about your background and Asymmetric. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It was really great to be on with you guys. These are great questions. Really enjoyed it.